Hi everyone, it's Cubus here. Yeah, it's just really weird saying that name. I'm not going to explain how I came up with it, but I was very young. Today we'll be going over some beta and unused content from The Sims 2, as I personally, along with many others, find it quite interesting to look at the history of a world of games development, as well as looking at what could have been, and some rarely seen images and videos. But I first off want to give a big shout out to Liza and the Sims 2 beta Discord server as a whole, as that's actually where a lot of interesting facts from this video comes from, and I'll leave the links down below. First of all, I'm sure you've probably all heard about the server room fire which destroyed the game files and is the leading cause for the Sims 2 losing many assets, graphical effects and the overall look of the game, needing to be redone by scratch. Well, it actually turns out that this is just a rumour started by people who couldn't comprehend why the game looked so different to how it did back then. A sim guru who worked on the game came forward and told everyone that there was no fire apart from, I think, a toaster set on fire or something. I think people just forget that sometimes game developers just decide to go on a different artistic route or design with their games, and so things change, as clearly demonstrated later on when I get to the changes in the UI. As well as this, we also know Maxis at the time were struggling with deadlines for the game, moving it back from a release date of January 2004 to September 17, 2004. In this time they were able to add pools, wants and fears and aspirations, all things thought to be left out of the base game as they couldn't finish in time. You know, it actually sounds quite similar to Sims 4. I mean, maybe if they delayed the game it wouldn't be such a mess. Rain was a feature originally planned for the base game as well as cars, both features which were later re-implemented in later packs. The cars meant to be driven by your Sims in the base game were actually still used elsewhere, such as when teens come and pick up another teen ready to sneak out. These cars were most likely the ones meant to be driven, and I think some of them were reused in nightlife. Another instance of this is in the image of a cut neighbourhood Riverside. One house in particular has a garage in the front. Perhaps this could be something left over from the time the game had cars, or maybe it was a simple part of the house design. Rain was shown throughout a lot of promotional photos and videos, but the way that Maxis had designed the rain here meant it was such a performance hog due to, if I'm remembering correctly, each raindrop being an individual asset rather than an on-screen effect. Here you can see the game does stutter when previewing the rain from afar, as well as there also being reported issue that it was glitchy and rained indoors. In fact, this same rain is still left over in the game files, and with the help of some mods you can actually activate it in the base game today without seasons installed. Yeah, and here you can see it does rain inside. But rain wasn't the only graphical enhancement that had to be cut due to performance issues. I think reflective flooring and reflective countertops were set to be in the game, and you can recreate the environments with lighting mods and configurations, but the game's performance will be super choppy and may actually cause some issues, so. Now we'll take a look at the user interface of the game and many versions it went through before it finally came to be what we have today. I'll go over Create a Sim first, as we don't actually have much about that. So the earliest media we actually have of Create a Sim comes from these few frames, which looks to be like a podium of some sort. Nothing too interesting here, just something to point out. Now here I think this slideshow of images comes from around 2003, and only because we have a video of Tim Letourneau demonstrating these features at E3 2003. If you're someone who's interested in getting the old hairstyles and clothes, I've left a link to the document which contains a whole lot of links for custom content at the bottom. I actually don't know who made that document, if I'm being honest. Here's a few more images of Create a Sim when it was in late development, so I'm sure it all looks very familiar. In 2001 they had a small team working on the game, as they were still releasing content for The Sims 1 and would be for another 2 years. But in the little amount of screenshots we do have from this era, it's obvious that it was in a very early testing stage. Next up was the 2003 period, where the UI looked very much like SimCity 4, and this is the era which many players feel is a completely different game. And I mean, it's true, it does look very different, but it was basically just Sims 1 in 3D mode at this point. Then later on into 2003 they began to experiment with a less plain gradient and tried to make it seem more bubbly and friendly. And eventually, although this looks quite recent, it was actually made at the start of 2004, as they had not yet designed aspirations or wants and fears, but they'd still begun to make the 3 neighbourhoods that we have today. Although the neighbourhoods actually had different names at the time. Pleasant View was called Pleasantville, Strange Town was called Strangeville, and Veronaville was called Europa. These game files also seem to suggest we were supposed to have an additional neighbourhood, Waterside. Barely anything about Waterside is known apart from these few images we have. In fact, the neighbourhoods themselves used to be very different, and it's clear it took Maxis a few times before they got what they wanted. This interview with Lucy Bradshaw tells us that Bella was playable, which means she hadn't been abducted by aliens yet. Overall, I don't think as much features were necessarily lost as people might think, but just that Maxis had loads of ideas for the game which were ultimately too much. There was even this whole thing about having a working doctor's office which you could actually go through via an actual ambulance that was in the game. But thank you for watching this video if you did. I'm sure it was hard to get over my overly British accent. That is absolutely terrible. What am I doing?